Are All-Star games fixable? Is this even something that leagues should be wasting their time on? Do fans actually want solutions, or is it just what it is?
Question. I think the reason they take such an outsized importance for the NBA, NHL, and Major League Baseball specifically is that these are oftentimes some of their most watched games of the regular season, right? So when you're talking about NBA viewership outside of Christmas Day, the All-Star game is going to be kind of what drives any sort of regular season year over year benchmarks, right? And so when the format sucks and the players don't try and viewership continues to fall, it is actually kind of a big deal. I won't say, they're not going to be very angry considering where their media rights situation is if, the All Star game doesn't draw as big of an audience as it used to. But I do think it's important. And then it's also just important for the kind of perception of the league. And I think the NBA specifically this season has really had to, battle a perception problem. And a showing like Sunday nights does not really help their cause. Especially, you juxtaposed it with how well the NHL's new format is. Well, I know that's only for 1 year, but the Four Nations Face-Off has been a smashing success. It really just kind of lays bare even more of the NBA's problems.
Ben?
I don't disagree that it's important. I think my stance would be, is it fixable? And I don't think it is, at least in terms of like the way we are looking at trying to fix the NBA All-Star game, because it always comes down to the same question, right? How do we get the players to try? How do we get the players to care? We've had this conversation on this podcast. The players don't care about the regular season right now. How are we going to get them to care about an exhibition? Like, I just don't think Bill Simmons had this whole thing on his podcast this week about making it for home court advantage like baseball did, and how you could maneuver the rosters and dangle home court advantage in the NBA finals. I'm not convinced players would care about that if you set it up that way. I really think that the answer to the question of what can we do to make the players care, I don't think there is one. Like, I think we've just gotten almost too smart for our own good when it comes to stuff like load management and things of that nature. I don't know where that incentive comes from. And so to me, it's about expectations. And I think what the NFL does well is they lower their expectations. There are no expectations for the NFL's All-Star game. It's flag football. It's on the background on Sunday afternoon, the week between conference championship games and the Super Bowl. And to me, the fix for basketball is go back to the old format, East versus West. You're going to play an exhibition game that's going to be played in the 200s probably. Some years it might be a competitive fourth quarter. Most years it won't be. But like, to me, this is just like sell some merchandise, sell some products, use it as a convention for your fans. But I don't see a solution if the goal is to make this like an entertaining product in terms of players being invested. I've yet to hear a solution that I think would add up.
It kind of feels like maybe the one difference between like where the NBA is now, and we'll get to hockey, but where the NBA is now and where the NFL is now, because is the fans, is the fact that people still pay attention to it. And that's the part that I'm kind of confused by, because you look at, even like I remember during the negotiations last year when the NBA was sorting through what its new broadcast deal was going to look like, John Skipper would come on to various Meadowlark podcasts that he appears on, and he's a former president of ESPN. He's been part of all this. And he basically said that whether it's the NBA or any other league, these types of events are often just throw ins to what's being negotiated. It's not really like something that a network is, really passionate about carrying. Obviously, there was kind of a goodbye to TNT this year, and they're integrated. Ernie Johnson hosts the Legends Brunch thing, and these guys are obviously around during the NBA 75, which I know was in your backyard, Ben. They had different, like, they did like a historical draft and all this kind of like shoulder programming around it that TNT shepherded. But I don't think it's making or breaking the investment on the part of the networks. We know it's important for the corporate sponsors and everything. I'm sure that they could just migrate that stuff to the in-season tournament or the finals, more of it if they needed to do that, and where these meetings take place and whatever. But yet you zoom out of all of that, and we have all this knowledge, and we know it's not popular, and we know everybody complains about it every year, and yet it does draw better than some of these other things. So it's like, I guess that kind of reinforces why it matters a little bit, but it's also confusing to me why that audience continues to come back. Do you guys have an answer to that? I mean, like, it's bigger than a, Sunday on ABC. There's big NBA games from February on. So roughly similar timing, not exactly, but close. And, real games that matter. Often they schedule it well so that, best teams are playing, health, whatever. We know load management can get in the way of that. But those games are decent. This is like double or triple that. Like, why? I don't get it.
Wouldn't it be because it's something that every fan base in theory cares about, at least to a degree? Like a Sunday Mavericks Suns game appeals to Mavs fans and Suns fans and a portion of diehard NBA fans, whereas the All-Star game in theory should appeal to all 30 fan bases, as well as, however much a casual fan exists at this point, I don't know. But like, yeah, I don't know. To me, that's not necessarily indicative of the health of the All-Star game.
Yeah, you do run up against the reason I made that comparison is to compare it to the Pro Bowl. And I do think there's a certain element of you can't really, the NFL stops being a useful comparison in a lot of conversations sometimes, because I watch Lions 49ers regardless. Mm-hmm. I know it's different, but I don't watch the Pro Bowl, and no one seems to care that the Pro Bowl is a joke. They make Peyton Manning go out and publicize it for 3 days every, February, and that's kind of the only reason it's happening. And it does. No one even. It's a drop in a bucket. It doesn't even matter. So, Drew, what's your take on why people keep tuning in despite everyone agreeing it's a bad product and maybe shouldn't even exist?
I think there's a key distinction between the Pro Bowl and the NBA All-Star game, and that's that, aside from LeBron James this year, people don't opt out of the NBA All-Star game, right?
True.
You're not getting pretty much any of the marquee guys at the Pro Bowl anymore. I mean, what was it, only 2 or 3 years ago where Tyler Huntley was playing in the Pro Bowl, the Ravens backup quarterback? I mean, the NFL knows it's a joke. It doesn't even try. So I think there's a key difference there. The NBA All-Star game, it's the only time where you're going to see all of the best players in the league on the court at the same time and, competing against each other. We all know it's not a real competition, but I think there is still something to that. And of course, there's the pomp and circumstance of it all. Of course, the NBA kind of got that wrong this year. But in the past, they've kind of done well in terms of, marketing the event and kind of, making it feel bigger than it probably should be, given what the product is on the court.
It's also in the middle of the season, and they split it by conferences, so I think the honor matters to guys more because there's 24 of them versus if you're in the NFL, you care about All-Pro more than you care about the Pro Bowl, so the idea of even making it doesn't matter. Like, there are a lot of differences, but yeah, I think that we're in this spot where it just feels like it's kind of run its natural course. I don't think they'll do away with it. I have some optimism that NBC could be a little bit more of a pressure valve for this stuff on the NBA and on the players, given that TNT kind of came into a rhythm and they've tried to spruce it up in odd ways that I don't think most fans have liked, with, comedians and YouTubers overly involved in everything. But Ben, what do you looking forward, like, is it just end it? Like, should we think like in the next 11 years, NBC and the NBA could just look at it and say, screw it, this is done? Or like, what comes next here before we pivot to the NHL side of it?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go away, because I think, as pessimistic as I am about all of this, the question comes down to, well, who cares about this? And who cares is the television partners. Like, this is, it's a throw-in a way, but this is like a part of the package. This is a part of what they pay for. They pay millions of dollars for, so they're not going to want it to go away. I mean, it's still going to draw, I would imagine, although it went head to head with SNL 50. You had White Lotus. I don't know how much that's going to put a dent in.
And then the delay of the Daytona 500 COVID got in the way too.
Yeah.
So there was all this stuff going on at the same time. We have not seen viewership numbers as we're recording this, which tells me they weren't good because they probably would be out already if they were up over last year even at all. But yeah, it's I'm sure they care. I think you're right.
Yeah. And I think the part about all this, which I touched on earlier, is just managing expectations, because the All-Star game by its nature is a PR product. I did some research heading into the show. The very first sports All-Star game was the 1933 MLB All-Star game, and it came
Nice.
amid the Great Depression. It was the mayor of Chicago went to the Chicago Tribune looking to hold a big event to boost morale and to raise money. They actually donated like a significant portion of the proceeds to those being affected by the Depression. So by its nature, it's a PR product. The first NBA All-Star game was 1951. It was coming on the heels of the college basketball point shaving scandal. And so the NBA, it was actually the NBA's head of publicity. It's like the first line in his obituary is that he came up with the idea for the NBA All-Star game. And their thought was, hey, let's get all the stars in one place. We'll capture some of these college fans who are afraid we might lose or who we think we can kind of pick off from the point shaving scandal. It was a big success. And so right now, the problem for me is, I guess, where did we hit this point where we felt like it needed to be fixed? Because even you mentioned the NBA 75th anniversary game in Cleveland. That was like a good game. Like LeBron James hit the game winner in Cleveland. It was a big deal. I think most people agreed it was a good television product. Like, we've had good All-Star games. It's just most years they're not going to be good. I feel like when you put the pressure on, hey, we have this new format, we're fixing this, and then it falls flat because everybody tuned in. It's like, well, I thought you were fixing it. Like, to me, that's where you lose. The perception battle is by constantly claiming you fixed it, when really it's always just going to be a big exhibition with all the biggest stars. And so I think if you just lean into that and take it for what it is, like, that's better than trying to reinvent the wheel every year and putting this constant scrutiny on your product.
Okay, so I think with reinventing the wheel, that gets us to the NHL side of it, which is exactly what they did this year. And I think it honestly is already reminding me of the RSN conversation we're going to have later, just in terms of like trying to get a handle on how we're even measuring the popularity and engagement in some of this stuff right now. Because I can tell you that, like, we can foreshadow that in 2026, regardless of what the viewership number ends up being for this one, it was up over from 2023 to 2024 by 14%. People forget that. So like the how much people are watching it doesn't seem to be directly correlated with the complaining. Let's just say that. And they'll put it on NBC next year, broadcast television, and it'll be better, in terms of the number that we're all pointing to. So it's impossible to really evaluate it. And I think that's why I wanted to ask, like, people are still watching. Why does it matter? Why do we care? But then we get to the NHL, and they're doing this Four Nations face-off. They're also going to open themselves back up to the Olympics next year, also on NBC, and some World Cup events and things like that the league is spearheading. This is kind of the first version of that. It's the US, Canada, Sweden, Finland, four of the bigger countries in the league, obviously Russia not taking part. And it has been the talk of a lot of sports media. It has been well-watched, mostly when it's been able to be on ABC, but also everywhere else, compared to NHL All-Star games, compared to NHL regular season, compared to anything you would look at outside of basically the Stanley Cup final. It's been great. My question on this is, because I've watched some of it, I'm not a hockey person. We notoriously had our team stolen from us. You guys might have heard down here in Phoenix, so I don't even have that to glom onto anymore. But I obviously can tune into fun sporting events, and I've liked it. It's been cool. I'm excited for the final on Thursday on ESPN, US-Canada. It's two things. So the NBA side of it, to me, and I'll let you go first, Drew, is that we're retroactively trying to tell ourselves a story about why things are happening, I think, where NBA viewership is fluctuating, the All-Star game is up and down, things or whatever. We're kind of struggling to understand how to measure the engagement around the league. So we say that it's because they're not competing. But what I wonder is, like, what are we thinking might happen if the players compete? There will be 1 million, 2 million text messages sent around across America. Hey, they're competing hard this year. Tune in. Go watch it. No, people have made up their minds already. This is a stale thing. Then you go to the NHL. the fact of the reinvention, in my opinion, is what made people tune in. Yes, it helps that the games have been awesome, and then you might want to watch the next one. But the first couple things that they put on going well, the first couple events being competitive, or before we knew it was going to be competitive, you just watched because it was cool, because it was new. Are we at a place now where you have to just dangle these shiny things in people's eyes in order to get them to be excited about it? Because that's kind of, I feel like the lesson I'm taking from all of this is we know how we feel about the NBA game. We don't like it. Oh, the NHL's trying something. I'll tune in. That's exciting. But then next year, are people going to care about the Four Nations face-off if it were to happen? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I agree with that premise. I think the excitement around the Four Nations face-off is because this is the first time that hockey has had a best-on-best international competition since the 2012 Winter Olympics. That alone, I think, has generated a lot of the excitement. And then, of course, you have the good games. You have the U.S. playing their neighbors in Canada. And I think that is the second aspect of this, right? It's the patriotism of it all, right? Wrapping yourself around the flag. There's a reason why the Olympics is, the second biggest viewership sporting event, uh, just behind the Super Bowl. It's because people like rooting for their country, right? And the World Cup, I guess you can throw that in there as well. We're not watching luge normally. We're not watching curling, right? Like we're watching it because we want to see if the U.S. is going to win a medal. And when we're taking on Canada, Finland, and Sweden, that's going to interest a lot of people that aren't necessarily hockey fans to begin with. I would include myself in that boat, and it seems like you too, Brendon. So that's why I never actually got to my answer on the NBA thing. Is it fixable? I think it is if you do something like this, and I know many people have suggested that. I think doing a Team USA versus the world competition has that kind of inherent draw when it comes to people's enjoyment of international sporting events, right? So that's what I would like to see
I
the
guess my
NBA
question
do.
is, would that work for 5 years, 1 year, 30, or would it become stale too?
Good, but
Wasn't hockey doing USA versus the world at one point?
I believe they did do that at some point, but they changed it to actually just competing for your country. Maybe that's
Right.
what the NBA needs to do, right? Have Team USA, Team Canada. I mean, all the other countries in basketball are really catching up. When you look at France and Canada and Greece, like these are all competitive teams in international basketball competitions. Perhaps that's what the league should be looking at.
Well, that's what I think that's kind of the rub for the NBA right now, though, is if you did USA versus the world, I feel like the world would kind of dominate USA at this point. Like Team USA was barely squeaking by in the Olympics. And now if you made an international super team, I don't know how viable like that would be competitively. And then conversely, if you did it country by country, I don't think there's enough players to even form another team other than what probably Team Canada and outside the US. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
that
just
would be it. I mean, maybe France, but not of all NBA players. You'd have to be bringing teams from other players from other places. That kind of actually is an interesting idea because I also think of the WNBA and what they have done in Olympic years is they pit the Olympic team that's about to go because they take a break for the Olympics versus like everyone else. And like that's kind of another level of like respect stuff that doesn't get thrown into a lot of these where it's like you're kind of being listed off as the extras, right? Like the players who are just below the cut and they've won. Those all-stars who aren't Olympians have won the past 2 times they've done it that way. And it makes for a pretty competitive, like Caitlin Clark obviously was one of the snubs this year and she played well, and Enrique Gumbawale and some of the right on the cusp kind of iffy players who don't make that Olympic squad. That's a cool way to do it. But I guess my theory is that the cool way to do it is what gets people's attention more so than even what the cool way is. It's the fact of it. But I hear you, Drew, and I think we're probably getting towards something where people being able to keep up with stuff overseas, travel being easier, blah, blah, blah. This stuff's going to be easier. I'm sure the NBA would love to involve, for instance, EuroLeague teams, Basketball Africa League teams, things like that. I mean, Adam Silver can't talk enough about the global aspect of all of this, so I'm sure he would love it.